They called him the Butcher of Baghdad. But behind the blood and brutality lies a truth far more complex. A boy raised in the shadow of betrayal. A man who clawed his way to the throne of Iraq with bullets and fear, and fell from power in front of the whole world, trapped like prey in a spider hole. But who was Saddam Hussein really? A tyrant, a pawn, or a symbol of something much darker? A reflection of global power games where truth is always the first casualty. This is the untold story of Saddam Hussein, and it begins long before the bombs ever dropped. Tikrit, Iraq, 1937, born into poverty, fatherless and abandoned. Young Saddam grew up amid instability, violence, and tribal pride. His stepfather, a brutal man, beat him relentlessly. By the time he was 10, Saddam had learned one thing: survival demands power. He couldn't read or write until age 10, but once he did, he devoured stories of Arab nationalism and revolution. His hero, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, charismatic, militant, and defiant against Western imperialism. At just 20 years old, Saddam joined the Ba'ath Party, a political movement that mixed Arab pride, secularism, and socialism. But it wasn't just ideas that moved Saddam, it was blood. In 1959, he was part of a failed assassination attempt against Iraq's prime minister. Saddam was shot in the leg. He fled to Syria, then Egypt, and returned years later, not as a student of politics, but as a future tyrant in waiting. By 1968, the Ba'ath Party staged a successful coup. Saddam wasn't the leader, not yet, but he was rising fast. As deputy under President Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, Saddam controlled the intelligence services. He built a terrifying network of informants, secret prisons, and execution squads. Anyone who spoke against the regime disappeared. His enemies tortured, killed, forgotten. Saddam didn't wait for power. He seized it. By 1979, al-Bakr resigned. Saddam became president. His first act, a purge. He gathered Ba'ath Party officials in a hall, read off names of traitors, and had them dragged out screaming. Some were executed immediately, others forced to kill each other to prove loyalty. That moment, the televised purge, was Saddam's message to the world. I am not just a president, I am the state. In the 1980s, Saddam's Iraq was a paradox. He modernized the country, built roads, schools, and hospitals. Women had rights. The oil was flowing. Iraq looked strong. But behind the curtain, he ruled with an iron fist. He used chemical weapons on Kurdish civilians in Halabja, a small Kurdish town near the Iranian border. For 5 days, Iranian-backed Kurdish fighters had taken control of the town. Saddam responded, not with troops, but with gas. Iraqi jets roared overhead, and then came the bombs. Not explosives, chemicals, sarin, mustard gas, VX. The town turned into a toxic grave. Mothers clutched lifeless babies, children lay frozen mid-run, faces twisted in terror. 5,000 civilians died, men, women, infants, choked to death in minutes. Saddam didn't just attack a town, he sent a message: betray me, and I will erase you. Even now, photos from Halabja haunt the world. Proof that Saddam was willing to use weapons of mass murder on his own people. He crushed dissent with executions, disappearances, and torture. Then came the Iran-Iraq War, an 8-year bloodbath, over 1 million dead. Entire cities turned to rubble. And why? Because Saddam feared Iran's Islamic Revolution would spread into Iraq. He wanted to stop it before it started. The world turned a blind eye, even supported him. America, Europe, the Soviet Union, they all armed him. He was a brutal dictator, yes, but as long as he fought their enemies, he was useful, until he wasn't. Saddam invaded Kuwait. He claimed Kuwait was stealing Iraqi oil and that it was historically part of Iraq. But the world saw it as naked aggression. The US and a coalition of 35 nations responded. Operation Desert Storm. The Gulf War lasted just 6 weeks. Iraqi forces were crushed. The highway of death showed charred bodies, twisted tanks, evidence of Saddam's humiliation, but he stayed in power. Despite uprisings in the north and south, despite sanctions that strangled Iraq's economy, Saddam held on, and he learned something crucial. He could outlast the West, but he needed to rebuild fear at home, so he tightened the noose. He released propaganda tapes showing him firing rifles, kissing children, praying in mosques. He declared himself the savior of the Arab world. Even as Iraqis starved, he built palaces, dozens of them, marbled monuments to his reign. After September 11th, everything changed. The US wanted vengeance. President George W. Bush claimed Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, maybe even nuclear. They said he was a threat to the world. But here's the truth. There were no weapons of mass destruction. The intelligence was wrong or manipulated. And some argue Saddam wanted the world to believe he had WMDs, to keep Iran afraid. Still, in 2003, the US invaded Iraq. In just weeks, Saddam's regime crumbled, statues fell, ministries burned, Baghdad descended into chaos, and Saddam, he vanished. For months, he was nowhere to be found. Rumors flew. Was he dead, hiding in Syria, leading a resistance? Then, on December 13, 2003, American troops found him, not in a palace, not in a bunker, but in a hole in the ground, outside a farmhouse, dirty, bearded, defeated. It wasn't just the location that shocked the world, it was the image. A man once wrapped in gold and gunfire, now bearded, gaunt, and confused. Soldiers pulled him from the dirt. He held no weapon. He did not resist. They checked his mouth for poison. They showed him to the camera. "I am Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq," he muttered. But there were no palaces left, no loyal generals, just a dictator, deposed, disarmed, and utterly alone. The once feared tyrant had become a ghost of himself. Saddam refused to acknowledge the court. He shouted at judges, challenged witnesses, and claimed the trial was a farce. But behind the scenes, America and the new Iraqi government wanted him gone. The verdict was predetermined. On December 30th, 2006, just before dawn, he was led to the gallows. Footage leaked, not as a state broadcast, but as a cell phone video. The world saw everything. Guards jeered, a noose tightened, and the trapdoor fell. There was no dignity, no final speech, no last act of power. The man who once ruled with terror left the world in the very chaos he created. But Saddam's story doesn't end with his death. Iraq didn't become peaceful. It fell deeper into chaos, civil war, sectarian violence, and eventually, the rise of ISIS. Some Iraqis today say things were more stable under Saddam. Others remember only the horror, the torture chambers, the executions, the disappearances. And yet, one question lingers. Was Saddam Hussein a product of his environment? A creation of colonial borders, Cold War power games, and Western interference? Or was he a monster all his own making? In the end, Saddam Hussein was many things. A brutal dictator, a paranoid survivor, a symbol of Arab pride to some and of evil to others. But above all, he was a man trapped in the machinery of power, ego, and empire. And perhaps that's the most terrifying part, because history doesn't just repeat itself, it evolves. And the next Saddam might not wear a military uniform. He might wear a suit,